A new wife enters a home marked by the pain of loss and the hope of a fresh start. In the first days, everything seems perfect, until small gestures reveal something dark behind the gentle smile. The child, silent and obedient, begins to live a nightmare invisible to the father, and when the truth finally comes to light, it exposes the terror that can exist behind the doors of an impeccable home. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. Marianne had always believed she knew every detail of Robert's life. 17 years of marriage build that kind of certainty, that comforting feeling that there are no more surprises, that everything has already been said, revealed, shared. She knew he preferred coffee without sugar, that he had supported Manchester United since he was a boy, that he had a small scar on his left knee from a bike fall at 8 years old. She knew he dreamed of one day traveling to Alaska, that he detested crowded concerts but loved empty cinemas on Sunday afternoons. She knew every mannerism, every sigh, every silence. Or at least, that's what she thought, as she prepared breakfast on that sunny March Tuesday in the spacious kitchen of their apartment in Notting Hill, London, where they had lived for over a decade. The sound of the electric coffee maker filled the room with its familiar hum. Marianne cut papaya into perfect cubes, with that meticulous way she always had of organizing things. Everything in her life had a place, an order, a reason for being. She built her routine like someone building a house brick by brick, with care and dedication. She always woke up at 6 in the morning, prepared coffee, woke up her children, Kyle, 15, and Sophia, 12, helped them pack their bags, sent everyone off, and only then sat down to drink her own coffee, already lukewarm, while checking her phone notifications and mentally planning the day's tasks. Robert appeared in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, hair messy with that just woken-up look that always made her smile. He was 43 but looked younger, with that relaxed way of someone who never took life too seriously. He was an architect, worked in an office in Canary Wharf, and spent his days drawing projects, negotiating with clients, solving construction problems. Marianne had always admired his ability to remain calm even in the most stressful situations, that serenity that captivated her when they met, so many years ago, at a graduation party at London University. "Good morning, my love." Robert kissed the top of her head and poured himself some coffee. "Did you sleep well?" Marianne nodded, concentrating on slicing the French bread. The boys were already awake. She heard the sound of hurried footsteps upstairs, voices arguing about who would use the bathroom first. It was an ordinary morning, absolutely normal, one of those that repeat themselves with little variation over the years, but there was something in the air, an almost imperceptible energy that Marianne couldn't identify. Perhaps it was just tiredness. She had been feeling strange lately, with a diffuse restlessness she couldn't explain. "Robert, will you be able to pick up Sophia from dance class today? I have a meeting at Kyle's school and I don't know what time I'll be out." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for Marianne to notice. "Of course, no problem. What time does it finish?" "5:30. "Agreed." Kyle rushed down the stairs, school uniform half crooked, backpack slung over one shoulder. He was in that complicated phase of adolescence, alternating between moments of affection and bursts of irritation for no apparent reason. Marianne had already learned to navigate these turbulent waters, maintaining patience even when he slammed his bedroom door or replied in monosyllables. Sophia, on the other hand, was still sweet and communicative, full of energy and wild plans, always drawing, creating stories, inventing imaginary worlds. The family had breakfast together, each immersed in their own thoughts and tasks. Robert checked emails on his phone. Kyle chewed his bread with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Sophia chattered about the ballet performance she was rehearsing. Marianne observed the scene with a mix of affection and melancholy. This was it, real life, unfiltered and unedited. It was beautiful and imperfect at the same time, full of small misalignments that somehow fit together. After everyone left, Marianne was alone in the apartment. She worked from home, was a freelance translator, spent her days converting technical texts from Portuguese to English, a task that required concentration but also allowed for flexible hours. She sat in front of the computer in the makeshift office they had set up in the guest bedroom, but concentration wouldn't come. She stared out the window, observing the street's movement, cars passing, people hurrying on the pavement, each carrying their own invisible dramas. Her phone vibrated. It was Danielle, her best friend since university days. They had that kind of friendship that spans decades, that survives city changes, marriages, children, all the transformations life imposes. Danielle lived in Islington, worked as a lawyer, and had an impressive ability to sense when something was wrong. "Marianne, shall we have lunch tomorrow? It's been a while since we had a proper chat." Marianne smiled as she read the message. Danielle always knew when she needed company. They agreed to meet at the Italian restaurant they frequented, a cozy and discreet place where they could talk without rushing. That afternoon, Marianne went to Kyle's school meeting. The pedagogical coordinator wanted to discuss his math performance, which had been fluctuating. Marianne listened carefully, asked questions, showed genuine concern, but a part of her was distant, thinking about things she couldn't even name herself. There was a strange sensation, as if something important was about to happen, as if the ground beneath her feet was becoming less solid without her understanding why. When she got home, it was already getting dark. Robert had picked up Sophia and was helping her with her homework at the living room table. The scene was so familiar, so comforting, that Marianne felt a pang of guilt for harboring those undefined thoughts. She had everything she ever wanted: a family, a stable marriage, healthy children, a comfortable life. Why then did she feel that weight, that restlessness? That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Marianne and Robert sat on the sofa to watch an episode of the series they were following. He put his arm around her shoulders, an automatic and affectionate gesture they had repeated for years. Marianne rested her head on his shoulder and tried to relax, but her body was tense, alert, as if waiting for something. "Are you all right?" Robert asked, noticing her stiffness. "I am just tired." He kissed her forehead and turned his attention back to the television. Marianne closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away that uncomfortable feeling that pursued her. The next day she met Danielle at the restaurant. Her friend arrived with her usual expansive manner, hugged Marianne tightly, and began talking non-stop about a complicated case she was handling at the office. But she soon noticed that Marianne was too quiet, lost in thought. "What's going on, Marianne? You look awful." Marianne hesitated. "It's nothing specific, Danny. It's just that I've been feeling strange, like something is out of place, but I can't identify what." Danielle frowned. "Is everything all right with Robert?" "It is. I think it is. I don't know. He's been a bit distant, but nothing too obvious. Maybe it's just in my head. Or maybe it isn't. You have that sixth sense, Marianne. You always have. Remember when you realized Philip was messing you around back in university, months before everyone else found out?" Marianne gave a weak smile. "That was different. Robert isn't Philip." "I know, but pay attention to the signs. Sometimes we ignore what's right in front of us because we don't want to see it." They changed the subject, talked about their children, about work, about plans for the weekend. But Danielle's words kept echoing in Marianne's head. Was she ignoring something? Were there signs she refused to see? In the following days, Marianne began to observe Robert more closely. Not that she was looking for problems, but there was a new vigilance, a more careful eye for details that had previously gone unnoticed. Did he check his phone more often? Did he seem distracted during conversations? Did he take longer to reply to her messages? Marianne felt ridiculous asking herself these questions mentally, as if she were misinterpreting her own life. A week later, on a Thursday afternoon, Marianne was at home organizing papers when the intercom rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. She answered with curiosity. "Good afternoon. Is this the residence of Mr. Robert Davies?" "Yes, I'm his wife. Can I help you?" "I have a delivery for him. Can you receive it?" Marianne authorized him to come up. Minutes later, a delivery rider handed her a plain brown envelope, discreet, with no visible sender. She signed for it and held the envelope in her hands, unsure what to do. She usually didn't open Robert's mail. Each had their own space, their privacy. But something about that envelope bothered her. It was too light to be work documents, and Robert had never mentioned expecting anything. Marianne placed the envelope on the living room table and tried to get back to work. But she couldn't concentrate. Her eyes kept returning to that plain brown rectangle, innocent yet threatening. What could be inside? Why had it been sent home and not to the office? Why was there no identifiable sender? An hour passed until Marianne couldn't take it anymore. She picked up the envelope, felt its weight, examined all sides. There was nothing written on it except Robert's name and address. She took a deep breath. She knew that opening someone else's mail was a violation of privacy, but the restlessness that had pursued her in recent days had turned into an almost physical urgency. She needed to know. With trembling fingers, she carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear it too much so she could close it again if it was just something from work. Inside was a single photo. Marianne took out the image and felt the world stop. It was an old photo, somewhat faded but perfectly clear. Robert, much younger, perhaps in his early 20s, was beside a woman Marianne had never seen. Both smiled at the camera in what appeared to be a park setting, but that wasn't what made Marianne's heart race uncontrollably. It was the child, a small girl, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, whom Robert held in his arms. The child had his light eyes, the same face shape, the same smile. And on the back of the photo, handwritten in neat script, there was just one sentence that shattered all of Marianne's certainties in a single instant. She deserves to know. Her father. Marianne let the photo fall to the floor. Her hands trembled so much that she had to sit down. The silent apartment seemed to spin around her. She took a deep breath, trying to organize the thoughts that crowded her mind. A daughter. Robert had a daughter. A daughter she never knew existed. A daughter who, by her apparent age in the photo, must have been born before they got married. Or during. No, impossible. Or could it be? She picked up the photo again, studying every detail. The resemblance was undeniable. That child was Robert's daughter there. Was no doubt. But who was the woman beside him? Who took this photo? And most importantly, why was someone sending this now, after so many years? Marianne looked at the clock. Robert would arrive in a few hours. The children would come home from school. Life would continue its normal course. People would walk through the door. Conversations would happen. Dinner would be prepared. But nothing would ever be the same. Nothing could go back to how it was before this photo, before this revelation that had turned 17 years of marriage into a huge question mark. She put the photo back in the envelope, hid everything in a desk drawer in her office, and tried to calm her breathing. She needed to think. She needed to understand. She needed to decide what to do with that bomb that had just exploded in her hands. But the only certainty she had at that moment was that nothing, absolutely nothing in her life would ever be the same. When Robert arrived home that night, he found Marianne in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with mechanical movements. He greeted her with a quick kiss, commented on the traffic, complained about a difficult client. Marianne heard everything as if submerged, the words arriving muffled, distorted. She looked at his face, searching for signs, searching for the truth hidden behind those eyes she thought she knew so well. "You're pale. Are you feeling unwell?" Robert asked, finally noticing her expression. "Just a headache. It'll pass. Do you want me to finish making dinner?" "No need, it's almost ready." He observed her for another moment, then went to shower. Marianne was left alone with her chaotic thoughts, with that photo burning in her mind like a toxic secret she didn't know how to handle. Should she confront him immediately? Should she investigate first? Should she pretend nothing happened until she better understood the situation? Dinner was a silent torture. Kyle and Sophia chatted, oblivious to the storm raging inside Marianne. Robert ate normally, commented on weekend plans, asked about the children's school. Everything so normal, so routine, so completely false, now that Marianne knew what she knew. That night, lying beside Robert in bed, Marianne lay awake in the dark. He slept peacefully, breathing regularly, body relaxed. How could he sleep so soundly, carrying a secret like that? Or maybe it wasn't a secret. Maybe it was just a closed chapter from the past that he considered irrelevant to the present. But then why was someone bringing it up now? The questions multiplied without answers. Marianne spent the entire night awake, watching the hours pass on the digital clock beside the bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside, feeling the crushing weight of a truth that had changed everything, even though nothing had changed yet. Marianne woke up tired, her eyes burning, and her body heavy as if she had carried stones all night. Robert had already left for work when she went down to the kitchen. He left a short note on the fridge saying he had an early meeting and wouldn't be back until late afternoon. She crumpled the paper between her fingers, feeling a dull rage grow in her chest. How could he continue living normally while she was falling apart inside? The following days were torture. Marianne tried to maintain her routine, prepare meals, help the children with their lessons, work on her translations, but everything felt unreal, as if she were playing a role of herself. She looked at Robert during dinner and saw a stranger. Every gesture, every word, every smile now carried a different weight. How many other things was he hiding? How many other lies sustained the marriage she believed to be solid? She took the photo out of the envelope countless times, studying every detail. The woman beside Robert was beautiful, had long dark hair, a wide smile. She wore a floral blouse and faded jeans, the casual style of someone not overly concerned with appearances. But it was the girl who held Marianne's attention. Those light eyes, that small nose, the perfectly shaped mouth, it was impossible to deny the resemblance. If that child was 2 or 3 years old in the photo, and the image seemed to be about 20 years old, judging by the paper's wear and the people's clothes, then she must now be in her early 20s, an adult woman. A woman who apparently wanted to meet her father. Marianne knew she needed to confront Robert, but fear paralyzed her. Fear that everything would be confirmed. Fear that the truth would destroy what was left of her marriage. Fear of having to explain to Kyle and Sophia that their father had another daughter, that there was a sister they never knew. How do you tell something like that to children? It was Danielle who found her crying in a neighborhood cafe 3 days after the photo arrived. Marianne had left home without a destination, just needing air, space, a break from the constant performance her life had become. Her friend entered the establishment by chance, saw Marianne sitting in a corner with red eyes and a cup of cold coffee in front of her, and immediately knew that something serious had happened. "Marianne, for heaven's sake, what happened?" Marianne couldn't answer immediately. The words choked in her throat, too heavy to be spoken aloud. Danielle sat beside her and waited in silence, holding her hand firmly. "He has a daughter, Danny, a daughter I never knew existed." The words came out in a broken whisper, but their impact was immense. Danielle's eyes widened, her mouth agape in shock. "How did you find out?" Marianne told her everything. The envelope, the photo, the message on the back, the days of agony not knowing what to do. Danielle listened in silence, processing each piece of information, and when Marianne finished, she took a deep breath before speaking. "You need to confront him. There's no other way, Marianne. This won't disappear if you ignore it." "I know, but I'm so scared, Danny. Scared that everything will fall apart." "Maybe it already has. You're just living in the rubble without realizing it." The sentence was harsh but true. Marianne felt tears stream down her face again. How had she reached that point? How hadn't she noticed before? Or had she always known, on some deep, unconscious level, that something was wrong, something hidden? That night, Marianne mustered her courage. After Kyle and Sophia had gone to sleep, she called Robert into the living room. He was on the sofa, fiddling with his laptop, reviewing projects. He looked at her with that carefree expression that now irritated her so much. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made Robert close his laptop and pay real attention. "Of course, what is it?" Marianne retrieved the envelope she had hidden on the bookshelf, between old books no one ever opened anymore. She placed it on the coffee table, between them, like a silent accusation. Robert looked at the envelope without understanding, then at her, confused. "What is this?" "Open it." He hesitated, then took the envelope and pulled out the photo. Marianne observed every micro-expression on his face. She saw the exact moment he recognized the image. She saw the color drain from his cheeks. She saw his jaw clench. She saw the terror in his eyes. Robert remained silent for too long, holding the photo with slightly trembling fingers. Marianne waited, her heart beating so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse and low. "Where did you get this?" "Someone sent it by mail here to the house with a message on the back. Read it." Robert turned the photo over and read the written sentence. He closed his eyes and let his head fall back, resting against the sofa. He stayed like that for long seconds, while Marianne watched him, torn between anger, sadness, and a morbid curiosity to finally know the truth. "Is she your daughter?" The question came out calmly, but carried the weight of days of anguish. Robert opened his eyes and looked at her. There was pain in that gaze, but also so much guilt that Marianne felt like looking away. "She is." The confirmation, though expected, hurt like a punch to the stomach. Marianne felt her legs weaken and sat in the armchair opposite him. "Tell me everything now." Robert ran a hand over his face, took a deep breath, and began. "It was before I met you, Marianne. Long before. I was 22, finishing university. I met Patricia at a friend's party. We were together for a few months, nothing serious. You know how it is at that age. But she got pregnant. And you didn't tell me? In 17 years of marriage, you never thought it important to mention you had a daughter." Marianne's voice rose, anger finally finding space to manifest. Robert raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Let me explain, please. When Patricia found out she was pregnant, she didn't want me involved. She said she would raise the child alone, that she didn't need me. I was young, immature, scared. I accepted. I thought it was for the best for everyone. But you knew you had a daughter and you never mentioned it. I tried to help financially at first. I sent money for a few months. But Patricia returned everything, said she didn't want anything from me. She said I wasn't welcome in the girl's life. So I stopped insisting. I tried to move on. I met you a few years later and thought that chapter was closed." Marianne felt nausea rising. "Closed? You thought having a daughter was a closed chapter, as if it were an old job or an apartment you left behind. It wasn't like that, Marianne. I was young, confused. I didn't know how to handle it. And when I met you, when we fell in love, I was afraid to tell you and lose you. I thought if you knew, you'd never want to be with me. So you preferred to lie. You preferred to build an entire marriage based on a gigantic omission. It wasn't a lie. It was just not telling something from the past. It's the same thing, Robert. The same damn thing." The silence that followed was dense, charged with unspoken accusations. Marianne felt her chest tighten, her breathing difficult. She was married to a man she didn't know. She was raising children with someone capable of hiding such an important thing for so long. "What's her name?" The question came out softer, tired. "Julia. Her name is Julia." "Julia." Marianne repeated mentally, giving a face and form to that child in the photo who was now an adult woman. "And she wants to meet you." "It seems so." "And her mother, Patricia." Robert hesitated. "I don't know. I haven't been in touch with her for years, decades." "But someone sent this photo. Someone knows where you live. Someone wants you to face this." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Marianne recognized. He was lost, as scared as she was, but in different ways. He was afraid of losing what he had built. She was afraid of discovering she never had anything real to lose. "What are you going to do?" Marianne asked. "I don't know. What do you think I should do?" The question caught her by surprise. Was he really putting this responsibility on her? "I don't know, Robert. Maybe you should have thought about that before hiding a daughter for 20 years. He hung his head, ashamed. "You're right. I messed everything up. I messed everything up because I was afraid." Marianne remained silent, looking at the man who had shared her bed for so many years. She felt anger, sadness, disappointment, but also a strange compassion. He had been a coward, yes, he had lied by omission, but he was also human, flawed, scared. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but she knew she needed time to process it all. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight," she said, standing up. "I need space." "Marianne, please." "No, I need to be alone." She climbed the stairs, feeling the weight of each step. She locked herself in the small room they used for guests and lay down on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The tears came silently, wetting the pillow. She cried for lost innocence, for broken trust, for the uncertain future that lay ahead. In the following days, the house turned into a minefield of awkward silences and careful conversations. Kyle and Sophia sensed that something was wrong, but didn't know what. Marianne and Robert maintained appearances in front of them, but the distance between the couple was palpable. She continued sleeping in the guest room. He accepted without protest, knowing he had no right to ask for anything. Marianne talked to Danielle again, pouring out everything she had discovered. Her friend listened carefully and then gave her direct, no-nonsense opinion. "You have two options, Marianne. Either end the marriage now or decide to forgive and move on. But you can't stay in this limbo. It's not fair to you or the children." "How am I supposed to forgive something like this?" "I don't know if you can, but you need to decide if you want to try, and there's something else you need to consider." "What?" "Julia. She exists. She's out there wanting to meet her father. Regardless of what you decide about Robert, she's a real person with real feelings." Marianne hadn't thought about that. She was so focused on the betrayal, the lie, that she hadn't stopped to think about the young woman behind the photo. Julia was not to blame for anything. She was just a daughter looking for her father. But accepting that meant opening the door to a reality Marianne wasn't sure she was ready to face. 2 weeks after the discovery, another envelope arrived. This time, Marianne opened it immediately. Inside was a handwritten letter in neat, feminine script. "Mr. Robert Davies, my name is Julia Christine Smith. I am 23 years old and I am your daughter. My mother, Patricia Smith, passed away last year, and before she left she told me about you. I spent months wondering whether or not I should look for you. I don't want to disrupt your life or cause problems. I just want a chance to meet you, to understand where I come from. If you are willing to talk, I am leaving my phone number. If you prefer not to contact me, I will respect your decision. I only ask that you read this letter and know that I have no bad intentions. I just want to meet my father. Sincerely, Julia." Marianne read the letter 3 times. The handwriting was beautiful, the words carefully chosen. You could feel the vulnerability behind each sentence. That young woman had lost her mother and was now seeking the only family she had left. How could Marianne stand between her and Robert? She showed him the letter that night. Robert read it in silence, his hands trembling. When he finished, he had tears in his eyes. "She lost her mother." Marianne nodded. "And now she wants to meet her father. What do I do, Marianne?" For the first time in weeks, Marianne felt her anger subside a little, making way for something more complex. She looked at Robert and saw not only the man who lied, but also a father who had never known his own daughter, who had carried guilt and fear for decades. "I think you need to call her." "And you? And us?" "I don't know yet. But this isn't about us right now. It's about a young woman who just lost her mother and is looking for her father. You have to do the right thing, regardless of what happens to our marriage." Robert looked at her with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm still very hurt and I don't know if I'll be able to get over this, but I won't be the kind of person who prevents a daughter from meeting her father." That night, Robert called the number Julia had left. Marianne listened to the conversation from upstairs, unable to move away but also unable to go down and participate. His voice was choked, emotional. He apologized, explained his absence, and arranged a meeting. The day of the meeting arrived enveloped in an anxiety that infected the whole house. Robert woke, up early, earlier than usual, and Marianne heard him pacing back and forth in the next room. She herself had barely slept, tossing and turning in the narrow guest room bed, thinking about everything that was about to happen. A part of her wanted to be present at the meeting, to see with her own eyes the young woman who shared blood with Robert. Another part wanted to protect herself, to keep her distance from a situation that still hurt like an open wound. They had agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Mayfair, a neutral and public place where both could feel safe. Robert had suggested Marianne accompany him, but she refused. That was his moment with the daughter he had never known. She had no place there, at least not yet. Perhaps she never would. When Robert came down for coffee, he was visibly nervous. Marianne prepared toast with butter and fresh coffee, automatic gestures she had performed for so many years that she didn't even need to think. They sat at the table in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Kyle and Sophia were still asleep, oblivious to the earthquake shaking the foundations of the family. "How are you feeling?" Marianne asked, more out of courtesy than genuine interest. The wounds were still too fresh for real compassion. "Terrified," Robert admitted, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I have no idea what I'm going to say. How do I explain 23 years of absence?" "I think you start by apologizing, and then follow your heart from there." He looked at her with that lost expression that had become common in recent weeks. "You're incredible, Marianne. I don't know how you manage to be so strong." "I'm not being strong, I'm just trying to do the right thing. For her, not for you." The coldness in Marianne's voice made him flinch. He nodded, accepting the punishment he knew he deserved, and returned to stirring his coffee in silence. When Robert left, Marianne was alone with her own thoughts. She sat on the living room sofa, looking out the window without really seeing anything. She imagined what that meeting would be like. Would Julia resemble the child in the photo? Would she have Robert's personality? Would she be shy or extroverted, intelligent or a dreamer? Would there be resentment in her eyes or just curiosity? Desire. Hours dragged on. Marianne tried to work, but the words on the computer screen blurred without making sense. She tried to read, but her eyes scanned the lines without absorbing anything. She was trapped in a kind of emotional limbo, waiting for an outcome she didn't know. Robert returned in the middle of the afternoon. Marianne heard the key in the door and her heart involuntarily quickened. He entered slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His eyes were red and swollen. He had clearly been crying. Marianne waited in silence, giving him space to speak when he was ready. He sat in the armchair opposite her and stared at his own hands for a long time. Finally, he began to speak, his voice hoarse and laden with emotion. "She's incredible, Marianne. Beautiful, intelligent, kind. She looks so much like me it hurt to look at her. And at the same time she has so much of Patricia. The way she smiles, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking." Marianne felt a pang of jealousy she hadn't expected. She didn't want to feel it, but it was inevitable. "How did you feel?" "Devastated. Guilty. Grateful that she gave me a chance. She didn't have to. She could have just hated me for the rest of her life and it would have been justified. But she was there, nervous but open, wanting to meet me." "What did you talk about?" "About everything. About her life, her studies, her work. She has a degree in biology, works in a lab. She loves animals, wants to do a master's degree. She told me about her childhood, about her mother. Patricia raised her alone, never remarried. She dedicated her entire life to Julia." The guilt in his voice was palpable. Marianne knew he was comparing himself to Patricia, measuring his own cowardice against her courage in raising a daughter alone. "She asked about you, about us," Robert continued. "I told her I was married, that I had 2 children. She was surprised but didn't seem hurt. She said she understands that I built a life and that she doesn't want to disrupt it." "But does she want to be part of this life?" "I think so. She didn't say it explicitly, but I could tell. She grew up without a father, Marianne, without knowing where half of herself came from. Now that she's found him, she wants to know. She wants to build some kind of relationship." Marianne took a deep breath, processing it all. "And what do you want?" "I want to know her. I want to make up for lost time, even though I know it's impossible. But I also don't want to destroy our family in the process. Perhaps you already destroyed it when you decided to hide this for 23 years. The sentence came out harsher than Marianne intended, but it was the truth. Robert accepted it in silence without trying to defend himself. They remained like that for long minutes, each lost in their own thoughts until Marianne asked what was hammering in her head. "When are you seeing her again?" "We've arranged for next week. She wants to show me where she works, introduce me to her friends." "And what about Kyle and Sophia? When are you going to tell them?" The question made Robert turn pale. He clearly hadn't thought about that yet, or was avoiding thinking. I don't know. How do I tell them something like that? With the truth, they deserve to know, but they're so young. Kyle is 15, Robert. Sophia is 12, they're not babies. And the longer you hide it, the worse it will be when they find out. And they will find out. Secrets always come to light. He knew she was right. He nodded slowly, accepting another consequence of his past choices. That night during dinner, the tension was almost visible. Kyle ate in silence, looking alternately at his father and mother, clearly sensing that something was wrong. Sophia, younger and less attentive to subtleties, talked about school, but even she seemed to feel the weight in the air. After they finished eating, Robert asked everyone to stay at the table. He had something important to tell them. Marianne felt her stomach clench. It was about to happen. The bomb that would destroy the image their children had of their father, the innocence that would never return. "Children," the father began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Kyle frowned, already on alert. Sophia looked confused, not understanding the gravity of the moment. "Before I met your mother, I had a relationship, and from that relationship a daughter was born, a sister to you two whom I didn't know until now." The silence that followed was absolute. Kyle's eyes widened, his mouth agape in shock. Sophia looked at her mother, seeking confirmation that she had understood correctly. Marianne nodded slightly, validating the impossible information they had just received. "You have another daughter," Kyle finally spoke, his voice louder than he intended. "And you never told us." "I didn't know she wanted to meet me. I thought it was best to leave the past in the past. But you knew she existed, you had a daughter, and you hid her from us your whole lives." The accusation hurt, but Robert accepted it. "I know. It was wrong. I was afraid and I made the wrong choice. But now she has found me, and I want to get to know her. I want you all to meet her too, if you're willing." Sophia began to cry softly. Marianne pulled her close, hugging her while casting a stern look at Robert. Kyle abruptly stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor with a jarring sound. "You're a liar," the boy shouted, before running up to his room and slamming the door. Robert got up to go after him, but Marianne stopped him with a gesture. "Leave him. He needs to process this alone." "And Sophia?" The girl was sobbing in Marianne's lap, clinging to her mother as if she were the only fixed point in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. "She'll be all right, she just needs time, we all do." That night was one of the hardest the family had ever faced. Kyle locked himself in his room and didn't answer when Robert knocked on the door. Sophia slept with Marianne in the guest room, clinging to her mother, asking between sobs if the family was going to end. Marianne tried to reassure her, but her own words sounded hollow. She herself didn't know what the future held. The following days were tense. Kyle barely spoke to his father, replied in monosyllables when forced to interact. Sophia fluctuated between curiosity about her unknown sister and anger at her father for lying. Marianne observed everything with a mix of sadness and resignation. The family she had built with such care was falling apart before her eyes. Robert met Julia again. This time he brought family photos, showed her where he lived, told her about Kyle and Sophia. Julia showed genuine interest in meeting her siblings, but respected that they needed time. She was patient and understanding, qualities that only increased Robert's guilt for having been absent all those years. It was Danielle who suggested family therapy. Marianne was at her house, pouring out how everything was falling apart, when her friend interrupted firmly. "You all need professional help, Marianne. This is too big to solve alone. A therapist can help everyone process their feelings and find a way forward." "I don't know if Robert will accept." "He has no choice. Either he accepts help or he loses his family for good." Marianne took the suggestion home that night. Surprisingly, Robert agreed immediately. He was desperate for anything that could fix the damage he had caused. They booked sessions with a family therapist recommended by Danielle. The first sessions were difficult. Everyone had to talk about feelings they would rather keep buried. Kyle expressed his anger, feeling betrayed by the father he had always idealized. Sophia verbalized her fear that the new sister would take her place in her father's heart. Robert cried openly, asking for forgiveness repeatedly, admitting his cowardice and his flaws. And Marianne, for the first time, let out all the pain, all the feeling of having been deceived, of having built a life on lies. The therapist helped them understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but rather choosing to move forward. That the family could rebuild, but it would be different because everyone was different now. Innocence had been lost, but perhaps it could give way to something more real, more honest. 3 months after the first photo, Marianne finally agreed to meet Julia. Robert arranged a lunch at a quiet restaurant, just the three of them. Marianne was extremely nervous, unsure what to expect or how to behave. How do you greet your husband's secret daughter? What kind of conversations do you have with a person who represented the greatest betrayal she had ever suffered? Julia arrived punctually, beautiful and elegant in a simple dress. She was indeed very much like Robert, with the same light eyes, the same slightly crooked smile. But she also had a sweetness of her own, a gentleness that was entirely hers. "Hello, Mrs. Marianne, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." Her voice was soft but firm. Marianne shook the extended hand, feeling a strange and confused emotion. "You can just call me Marianne, and the pleasure is mine." They sat at the table and there was a moment of awkward silence before Julia took the initiative. "I know this situation is strange for everyone, and I want you to know that I have no intention of causing problems. I just wanted to meet my father, to understand where I came from." Marianne studied the young woman's face in front of her. There was no malice there, only sincerity. "You're not causing problems, Julia. The problems already existed. They were just hidden." Robert looked at Marianne with gratitude. She was being bigger than the situation demanded, and he knew it. The lunch flowed better than anyone expected. Julia talked about her work, her studies, her passion for marine biology. Marianne shared stories about Kyle and Sophia, showed photos on her phone. Robert watched the two most important women in his life conversing and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that they were understanding each other, sadness that it had taken so long to get there. At the end of lunch, Julia timidly asked if she could meet her siblings. Marianne looked at Robert, then back at Julia. "They're still processing all of this, but I think they'll be ready soon. Kyle is having a harder time, but Sophia has asked about you a few times." Julia smiled, her eyes shining. "I'm in no hurry. I'll be here when they're ready." When they left the restaurant, Marianne surprised herself by hugging Julia. It was a brief but sincere embrace, an acknowledgement that this young woman was not an enemy. She was just a victim of circumstances like everyone else. In the car driving home, Robert took Marianne's hand. "Thank you for giving her a chance." Marianne didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window, watching the city pass. Finally, she spoke. "I still don't know if I'll be able to forgive completely, but I'm trying. For myself, for the children, and yes, for Julia too. She doesn't deserve to pay for mistakes she didn't make. I love you, Marianne, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to win back your trust." The following months brought changes Marianne never imagined possible. The family was rebuilding itself piece by piece like a broken mosaic gaining a new form. It was no longer the same family as before, and it never would be, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could become something different, something more truthful. Marianne spent her mornings on the apartment balcony, drinking coffee and observing the street movement below. It was in these moments of solitude that she processed everything that had happened, all the layers of emotions that accumulated day after day. There were still moments of anger, sudden explosions that caught her by surprise when she least expected it. She would be preparing dinner and suddenly remember the lie, the secret kept for so many years, and she would have to lean on the sink until the wave passed. She would close her eyes, breathe deeply, count to 10 as the therapist had taught. But there were also moments of unexpected peace, when she looked at Robert playing with Sophia or helping Kyle with his homework, and she could see beyond the betrayal. She could remember that there was a flawed man there who genuinely loved. A man who woke up early on weekends to make pancakes, who never forgot birthdays, who cried when each child was born. These memories didn't erase the pain, but they helped soften it, making it bearable. The house had changed since the revelation, not physically but energetically. There was a tension that hung in the air, noticeable especially at mealtimes when everyone sat at the table and tried to maintain some normality. Marianne cooked as she always did. Robert asked about the Children's Day, but there was an invisible script that everyone followed, like actors in an overly rehearsed play. Conversations were cautious, avoiding certain topics, treading on emotional eggshells. But little by little, very slowly, these moments became more natural, less forced. Sophia was the first to agree to meet Julia. The girl's natural curiosity overcame her resentment, and on a Saturday afternoon, Robert took the two of them for ice cream at an ice cream parlor in Shoreditch. Marianne stayed home with Kyle, who still adamantly refused to meet his half-sister. The boy was hardened by anger, using it as a shield against the pain of betrayal he felt. Marianne prepared popcorn and put on a movie she knew Kyle liked, trying to create a light and relaxed atmosphere. The boy sat beside her on the sofa, but was clearly tense, thinking about his sister and father who were together at that moment. He nervously fiddled with his hands, checked his phone every couple of minutes, clearly imagining what was happening at that meeting. "You don't have to like her, you know," Marianne said suddenly, pausing the movie. "Nobody is forcing you to accept this situation immediately." Kyle looked at his mother, surprised by her frankness. "Then why does everyone keep pressuring me?" "Nobody is pressuring you, my love. We're just giving you the option. Julia exists, that's a fact we can't change. But how you deal with it, how much time you need, whether or not you want to meet her, all of that is your choice, completely yours. And you? How are you coping?" Kyle's voice came out low, vulnerable, reminding her of the child he still was beneath that angry teenage armor. The question caught Marianne off guard. She rarely talked about her own feelings with her children, always trying to be strong, to be the safe harbor. But perhaps Kyle needed to see her human, needed to know that he wasn't alone in his confusion. "Badly," she admitted, feeling a lump in her throat. "Some days I still want to scream at your father. Some days I wake up in the middle of the night and just lie there watching him sleep, wondering who that man beside me is. Some days I want to pack my bags, take you and Sophia, and go far away. But there are also days when I can see beyond the pain, days when I can remember the 17 years we built together, all the good things we experienced." "But he lied, Mum. For 23 years. How do you trust someone like that again?" Marianne took a deep breath before answering. "I don't know if I will. Trust him. Not in the same way, at least. But I'm trying to find out if I can trust in a new, different way. A trust that recognizes that people are imperfect, that they make terrible mistakes, but that they can still choose to do better from now on." The boy nodded slowly, processing, and for the first time in months Marianne saw the armor crack a little, saw the scared boy behind the protective anger. He leaned his head on her shoulder, a gesture he hadn't made since he was a child, and they stayed like that, watching the movie in shared silence, each lost in their own thoughts but united in common pain. When Sophia returned, she was radiant in a way Marianne hadn't seen in months. She had that sparkle in her eyes, that contagious energy that had always characterized the girl. Marianne met her at the door, eager to know how the meeting had gone, trying to read between the lines of her daughter's face what had happened. Robert stayed behind, respectful, giving space for mother and daughter to converse, knowing that Marianne needed to be the first to hear. "Mum, she's so cool." The girl spoke breathlessly, words tumbling out in an uncontrollable torrent, her eyes shining with that characteristic excitement. "She told me about her work in the lab, about the marine animals she studies. She showed me pictures of turtles, Mum, real turtles that she helps protect. And there are dolphins too, and even a rescued whale. And guess what else? She likes the same bands as me. We discovered we both love that song I'm always humming that you say you're tired of. And she really promised to take me to the aquarium where she works, she said. She can show me the whole lab." Marianne smiled, seeing her daughter's enthusiasm, feeling her heart warm with that genuine joy. But she also felt a pang of something she took a moment to identify. It wasn't exactly jealousy, not in an obvious or petty way, but a strange and uncomfortable sensation of sharing her children with an outsider. Julia was entering their lives, not as a temporary visitor, but as a permanent presence, occupying a space that hadn't existed before, changing the family dynamic in ways Marianne was still trying to comprehend. It was as if the family were a carefully balanced recipe, each ingredient in exact measure, and suddenly a new component had been added, altering the taste of everything, creating something different that she didn't yet know if she liked or not. "That's good, my love," Marianne said, hugging her daughter and kissing the top of her head, breathing in that familiar scent of children's shampoo. "She seems like a very special person." "She is, Mum. And guess what? She asked about you. She wanted to know how you were, if you were very upset, if you didn't mind her getting to know us. She said she doesn't want to cause any problems. She just wants to get to know her father and his family. I think she was afraid you'd be angry." Marianne felt something stir in her chest, a complex emotion that mixed respect, sadness, and a hint of guilt. Julia's consideration, that genuine concern, even though she was the most innocent person in all that confusion, touched her in an unexpected and profound way. "She is very kind," Marianne replied, and for the first time she managed to say it without it hurting so much, without the words scratching her throat on the way. "Hout!" Robert watched mother and daughter with a relieved expression. At least one of the children was accepting the situation. Kyle continued to be a challenge. The boy barely looked at his father, replied in monosyllables when forced to speak, and spent most of his time locked in his room or at friends' houses. It was during one of the family therapy sessions, almost 2 months after that first meeting between Sophia and Julia, that Kyle finally exploded. The therapist, Dr. Helen, had asked him how he was feeling. It was a question she asked every week, always patiently waiting for the monosyllabic answer. But that day something was different. Instead of the usual reply, something broke inside him. "How am I feeling?" the boy shouted, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face. "I feel betrayed, deceived. I spent my whole life thinking I knew my dad, that he was an honest person, that he was my hero, and I find out it was all a lie. He had another daughter and never told us. Not me, not Sophia, not Mum. How can I trust someone like that?" Robert tried to speak, but the therapist stopped him with a firm gesture. It was important for Kyle to get everything out. "And now everyone wants me to be nice, to accept Julia as if nothing happened," Kyle continued. "But I can't. Every time I look at her, I remember that my dad is a liar." The silence that followed was heavy. Robert was crying, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. Marianne held Sophia's hand, who was also crying softly. The therapist waited for everyone to calm down before speaking. "Kyle, what you're feeling is completely valid. You have a right to your anger, to your pain, but you need to understand that holding on to this hatred will hurt you more than anyone else. Forgiving doesn't mean saying what happened was right. It means choosing not to let it destroy you." "But how do I forgive?" the boy asked, genuinely confused. "You don't forget. You'll never forget. But you learn to live with it. And perhaps with time, you'll be able to see that your father, despite the terrible mistakes he made, is still human. He still loves you. He can still be a better person." Robert looked at his son, his eyes red. "Kyle, I know I messed everything up. I know I broke your trust and that maybe you'll never see me the same way again. But I love you. I love you. I love Sophia. I love your mother. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you all deserve me to be." Kyle didn't answer. He just turned his face away, letting the tears fall. But something had changed. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with other, more complex emotions. Marianne was also on her own healing journey, a winding and painful path that followed no straight line. The therapy sessions, both family and individual ones, that she started at Danielle's persistent urging, helped her understand that the marriage she had wasn't entirely based on lies. There was true love there, love that manifested in everyday gestures throughout all those years. Robert always remembered how she liked her coffee, always checked if he had locked the car because he knew she worried about it, always put his phone on silent when she had a headache. These were small details, Automatic gestures, perhaps, but they revealed attention, care, consideration. There were real and authentic moments, shared laughter. In the middle of the night, deep conversations about dreams and fears, comforting hugs in difficult times. There was an entire life built brick by brick that meant something, that had value even if tainted by the gigantic omission. Robert's omission about Julia was enormous, monumental, unforgivable for many. Marianne knew that several friends would have already ended their marriages, would have packed their bags without looking back, and there were days, many days, when she herself thought about it, sitting on the balcony with a forgotten cup of coffee cooling on the table, imagining what it would be like. To start over, find a smaller apartment, share custody of the children, explain to family and friends that the marriage was over. But there were also days when she looked at Robert sleeping beside her and saw not just the man who lied, but the partner of almost 2 decades, the devoted father of her children, the person who held her hand when her mother was unwell, who stayed awake all night when Kyle was born prematurely. These memories didn't erase the betrayal, but they prevented it from being the only thing Marianne could see when she looked at him. The individual therapist, Dr. Beatrice, a woman with a calm voice and compassionate gaze, helped Marianne understand that she didn't need to make a final decision immediately, that it was okay to live in uncertainty for a while, in the emotional limbo between staying and leaving. That forgiveness wasn't a switch that turned on all at once, but a slow and gradual process, full of ups and downs, good days and terrible days. Some days, Marianne woke up feeling strong, able to forgive, ready to rebuild. Other days she woke up with such intense anger that she could barely look at Robert without feeling nauseous. And all of this, the therapist patiently repeated, was valid, a normal part of the healing process. She returned to sleeping in the master bedroom after 4 months, not because she had completely forgiven him, but because she was tired of running away, tired of punishing herself along with Robert. They made love that night for the first time since the discovery, and it was different. Less innocent, more conscious, laden with all the wounds that had not yet fully healed. But it was real, perhaps more real than ever. Julia, in turn, was patient and respectful of everyone's process. She didn't pressure to be accepted, didn't demand attention. She was simply available, present when they wanted her company, absent when they needed space. It was Danielle who suggested Marianne try to get to know Julia better. They were having coffee when her friend asked if Marianne had talked to her, just the two of them. "I think it would be good, Danny, but I'm scared." Scared of what? Of liking her, of finding out she's an amazing person and having to deal with that. Danielle laughed. And if she is amazing, that would make everything easier, not harder. Danielle's words echoed in Marianne's head for days, circling in her mind during everyday tasks, during sleepless nights, during moments of solitude. Days later, when Julia sent a timid invitation via text message, full of preemptive apologies in case Marianne didn't want to, she surprised herself by accepting. They met at a small, cozy bakery in Notting Hill, a discreet place where they were unlikely to run into acquaintances. Marianne arrived 5 minutes early, nervous in a way she hadn't felt since adolescence. She ordered a coffee and fiddled with the cup, watching the door, her heart quickening each time someone entered. When Julia finally appeared punctually, Marianne was once again struck by her physical resemblance to Robert, the same light eyes, the same way of tilting her head when thinking. The conversation started awkwardly, full of embarrassing pauses and overly superficial topics. They talked about the weather, about traffic, about the quality of the coffee. But little by little, as the cups emptied and were refilled, as the cheese bread was divided into smaller and smaller pieces, something changed. The barriers began to fall, one by one, timidly. Julia told her about growing up without a father, about the nights she spent awake as a child, looking out the window and imagining that every man who passed by could be him. She told her about the lies she invented for her friends at school when they asked, creating elaborate stories about a father who traveled a lot for work, who lived far away, who sent secret gifts. She told her about birthdays where she blew out the candles wishing he would magically appear, about the constant feeling of incompleteness, as if half of her was missing and she didn't know where to look. Marianne listened to everything with a heavy heart, feeling for the first time the young woman's pain in a visceral and real way. It was no longer an abstraction, no longer just the secret daughter who represented betrayal. It was a person, a young woman who had suffered, who had carried invisible wounds throughout her life. In turn, Marianne found herself sharing things she hadn't even told Danielle. She talked about how she woke up in the middle of the night with a racing heart, questioning every moment of her marriage, wondering what other lies might be hidden, about the feeling of being in a boat without an anchor, adrift in a sea of uncertainties where nothing seemed solid anymore, about how she looked at old family photos and could no longer see them in the same way, as if an invisible stain had spread over all the memories. And little by little, in those meetings that became weekly, always at the same bakery that had become a neutral and safe territory, Marianne discovered something surprising and unexpected. She liked Julia. Genuinely, honestly liked her. The young woman was intelligent in a non-arrogant way, subtly funny in a way that caught Marianne by surprise, had a way of seeing the world that was both cynical and hopeful, marked by pain but not defined by it. She had been hurt by her father's absence, but hadn't let it turn her into someone bitter or resentful. She had built an admirable life despite the difficulties, was making a real difference in the world through her work in marine conservation, had loyal friends who adored her, had clear and achievable dreams. It was during one of these meetings that Julia asked a question that changed something fundamental in Marianne. "Do you hate me?" the young woman asked, vulnerable. "For existing, for showing up?" Marianne looked at the young woman and felt something unexpected. "No, Julia, I don't hate you. At first, maybe I felt anger, but not at you. At the situation, at Robert. But at you, never." Julia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." The turning point for Kyle happened unexpectedly. Julia invited him to a lecture at the lab about marine conservation. The boy initially refused, but Marianne gently encouraged him. "Go, just this once. If you hate it, you never have to see her again." Kyle went reluctantly, but returned transformed. Julia had introduced him to a new world, had answered his questions with patience. For the first time, he saw his half-sister not as a symbol of his father's betrayal, but as an interesting person. "She's cool." That was all Kyle said when he got home, but his tone was different. A year after the first photo arrived, the family organized a barbecue at home. The idea had come from Sophia. Marianne agreed after much hesitation. It was the first time they were all intentionally together. Julia arrived punctually, bringing a dessert she had made. She was clearly nervous. Kyle greeted her with a nod, not exactly warm but not hostile either. Sophia hugged her effusively. Marianne watched from afar, Robert beside her. The scene was surreal, but also strangely natural. There was her family, expanded, transformed, imperfect but real. "Are you all right?" Robert asked softly. Marianne thought, was she all right? Not completely. There were still difficult days, but she was in a different place. "I'm trying, and I think that's all I can do. It's more than I deserve." She looked at him. "Maybe, but it's not about what you deserve. It's about what I choose to give." During lunch, Julia told stories about her mother, about how Patricia had been strong and loving. Robert listened in silence, tears streaming down his face. He was crying for the woman who had raised his daughter alone, for the lost years. Sophia took Julia's hand. "Your mum sounds like she was an amazing person." Julia smiled through her tears. She was. She was everything. It was Kyle who surprised everyone. The boy had been quiet, but suddenly spoke. "It must have been hard. Growing up without a father, I'm sorry about that." Julia looked at her brother with gratitude. "Thank you, Kyle, that means a lot." It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was a start. That night, after Julia had left, Marianne and Robert sat on the sofa, tired but at peace. "I think we're going to be okay," Marianne said. Robert pulled her close. "We will. Not in the way it was before, but in a new way. Maybe even better. I don't know if it will be better, but it will be more honest." They held each other in silence. The journey wasn't over. There would always be scars, always painful memories, but there would also be love, truth, and the courage to continue. Marianne looked out the window, seeing the city lights. She thought of all the families out there, each with their own secrets, their own struggles. She thought about how life is never simple, never perfect. But she also thought about resilience, about forgiveness, about second chances. She thought about Julia, who could have come with anger but chose kindness. She thought about Kyle, struggling with his pain but finding compassion. She thought about Sophia with her capacity to love, and she thought about herself, about how she had grown through the pain. Robert fell asleep first, his head resting on her shoulder. Marianne stayed awake a little longer. Did she still love that man? Yes, in a complicated and imperfect way. Did she trust him as before? No, perhaps never again. But she was willing to try to build a new form of trust. She thought about the future. She thought about Julia becoming a real part of the family. She thought about shared birthday parties, about expanded Christmases. She thought about the possibility of grandchildren one day, children who would grow up knowing they had an aunt. Julia. It wouldn't be easy. There would be awkward moments, difficult conversations. But there would also be love. And in the end, perhaps love was enough. Not the perfect love of fairy tales, but the real, imperfect love of real people trying to do their best. Marianne finally got up, covered Robert with a blanket, and went upstairs to check on the children. Kyle slept on his stomach, his face relaxed. Sophia was curled up in the sheets. Marianne kissed each of their foreheads and felt a wave of protective love. They were her children, nothing would change that. And Julia was also becoming part of this constellation of love. In the bedroom, before going to sleep, Marianne picked up her phone and wrote to Julia. "Thank you for today. It was special having you here. You're always welcome." The reply came almost immediately. "Thank you for accepting me, for giving this impossible situation a chance. You are an incredible person, and I feel lucky to have you in my life." Marianne smiled in the dark. It was strange, but true. Amidst all the pain, something beautiful was emerging. An expanded family, full of imperfections, but also possibilities. She lay down and finally allowed sleep to take her, thinking of Patricia, the woman she never knew but who was present in all of it. She thought about how all those difficult choices had led to this moment. And as she slept, in different parts of the city, other members of this family also slept. Robert carrying his guilt but also his gratitude. Kyle still struggling but open to possibilities. Sophia dreaming of her sister and future adventures. And Julia, in her apartment, looking at her mother's photo, finally feeling that she belonged somewhere. Dawn would come bringing new challenges. There would be bad days when old wounds would ache. There would be moments of doubt, but they would face them together. This family that destiny had stitched together in unexpected ways. And perhaps, years later, when they looked back, they would see that that photo was not the end of something, but the beginning of a deeper honesty, of a more conscious love, of a truer family. The truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it builds something new from the ruins. Marianne fell asleep with that thought, a small smile on her lips, knowing that the path would be long but that she was no longer lost on it. She had a map now, drawn with her own choices, with her own courage. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marianne, Robert and Julia has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of pain, forgiveness and rebuilding, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out most to you in this narrative. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, the secrets we carry and the courage needed to face difficult truths. Life is full of twists and turns that test our capacity to love and forgive. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the mysteries of the human heart.